We'll do a chalice sliding, and which is number 453. So we'll light it first. In back once one time. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. From the Passover Haggadah. If you grab your hymnal, number 128, I like to always remember that most of these hymns or songs were originally, they were written as poetry. And then they attached music to it later on. So I want to just do two verses, number 1 and number 3. And Joyce is not mentioned on our program because I didn't know in time that she would be able to do it, but Joyce will play the tune for us.
You want to play it through one time?
Why don't you? It's not that long, and I don't think everybody's familiar with it. So,
right.
Yeah, she'll play it through once, and we'll do 1 and 3, and if you could focus on the words that people wrote. Talk about the sorrows we must bear for failures, pain, and loss. For each new thing we learn, well, many times we learn through those pains and loss, we learn things that we wouldn't necessarily have asked to learn, but they are profound. I think this ties in with David's talk. So let's go to, there's a responsive reading on 586. So you would turn to that. We all have our preferences of how we like to do things. I like to have one side of the room do the first part, and then the other side of the room do the second part, the answering call. So it is the idea of democracy. And I will.
Which side?
Huh?
Which side starts?
This will be the side 1, and this will be side 2.
Okay. Oh, right.
And I would like to mention that anytime Elwood English, a longtime member of our fellowship, would do a program on something related to government and democracy. He almost inevitably would pick this reading. So he is not able to be with us at this time, but he's certainly something we can hold in our hearts and our minds. Okay, number 1, you're up.
As labor is the common burden of our race, so the effort of some to shift their share of the burden onto the shoulders of others is the great durable curse of the race.
As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master.
This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this, to the extent of the difference, is no democracy.
Our reliance is in our love for liberty. Our defense is in the spirit which prizes liberty as liberty to all people, in all lands, everywhere.
Destroy this spirit, and we have planted the seeds of despotism at our own doors.
Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves and cannot long retain it.
Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world?
Let us have faith that right makes right, and in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand.
Then we will have our offering. Any change you put in there will go to the charity. I think we're still doing Angela's Piazza. And other contributions will go to support our fellowship and keep us going. Emptying their
Emptying our pockets.
We have one more verse, but
many of you know David Luthold. He has an interesting story. He grew up in the ranch in Mold and inherited part of it and ran it for many years. He also got a degree in a doctorate in political science and taught at the University of Missouri. Once he retired from that, he started coming back to Montana like 6 months of the year to help run the ranch. So we kind of had our calendars set, okay, the Lutholds will be here like the 1st of April. And then it was a little indefinite, and around Halloween or sometime in October usually left, I think. But he and his wife Carolyn, who's now deceased, brought a wonderful gift to our fellowship. I think, David, how many times have you spoken for us at this fellowship? Do you have? I mean, it started in the 90s, and I think we skipped 1 year during the pandemic due to scheduling issues or something like that. But he's always been provocative in in the thinking and helping. I'm just always glad to ask him and have him come back. And in addition to thinking he's a wonderful person, we're happy to have him with us. So his topic this morning is partisanship and democracy. So David, happy to have you.
thank you very much, Elida, for the introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak to Booth once again. As Elida said, I joined the Booth when I took over the family ranch more than 25 years ago. But I sold the ranch in 2013. And since then, I've spent summers in the family cabin on the Stillwater River. My topic today is political polarization and its impact on immigration, climate change, and democracy. Surprisingly, a quarter of our U.S. voting population identify themselves as Republicans. That's only a quarter. Another quarter are Democrats, and the remaining half are classified as independents or maybe other parties. The proportions of Republicans and Democrats in the population has been declining for the last 50 years. But partisan antipathy has been growing during that period of time. The proportions of party identifiers who hold unfavorable views about the other party has grown steadily over the last 30 years. Today, 62% of the Republicans hold very unfavorable views about Democrats, and 54% of Democrats hold very unfavorable views about Republicans. And independents who lean toward a party also hold unfavorable views about the other party. And there are some people out there, mostly young people, who have unfavorable views about both of the political parties. Presidential approval has come to depend more heavily on the party of the president, so that Democrats disapproved of Trump far more than Republicans did, and Republicans disapprove of President Biden, far more than Democrats. That's a good part of the explanation why both Trump and Biden have had low approval ratings, that they were starting with the opposition party having an unfavorable view of their activity. And it applies to a variety of many other people. This is widespread. And parents used to worry that their children would marry a Catholic and or somebody out religion. Today, that concern isn't so great, but there is concern among a fair number of parents that their children will marry somebody of the opposite party. The party has taken over as a dividing pattern in the United States. Bill Bishop, in his book, The Big Sort, explained that Americans have spent decades sorting themselves into alarmingly homogeneous communities. With ever-increasing specificity, we choose the communities and media that are compatible with our lifestyles and beliefs. The same thing happens with regard to states. About 80% of the states are sure to vote for a particular party for president. In Montana is very definitely going to vote Republican for president, no matter who the nominee is. My cousin lives in Washington State, and he complained years ago to me that his choice did not matter because Washington was always going to vote Democratic for the president of the United States. An interesting example is Missouri. Throughout the 20th century, Missouri voted for the winner in all elections but one. In the 21st century, Missouri has voted Republican in every election. Why do we have more polarization now than 50 years ago? know, but we do have it. We did have polarization in the 19th century when the nation was split over slavery, which the South practiced and many people in the North abhorred. And for years following the Civil War, the two parties did what was called waving the bloody shirt. That is, they campaigned on the basis that the other party had been dominant on the other side, so there was constant reminding of people of the war in which the Republicans had been in the North, the Democrats had been in the South. That period of intense polarization in the 19th century was also a period of severe income inequality, with a few wealthy people having huge amounts of money. We have the same situation now. I don't know if income inequality and partisan polarization are related. I don't know if one causes the other, but they have occurred at the same time twice now. What changed to increase the polarization, the political polarization in this country? One item, certainly, was that the Democratic Party lost its Southern conservatives. The South was, for a long time, historically Democratic, going back to the Civil War, often referred to as the solid South because it was solid for the Democratic Party. But in the 1960s, Northern Democrats led the way in adopting civil rights laws, and Southern whites switched to the Republican Party. Blacks went the opposite direction. Black voters had at one time been strongly Republican, those few blacks who could vote, because Lincoln was the Republican president who freed the blacks. But in the 20th century, blacks switched to being Democrats. At the same time that the Southern conservatives were joining the Republican Party, the moderates in the Republican Party were finding more and more difficulty. And a good example was Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York. And Nelson Rockefeller wanted to be president, but he lost the Republican nomination to Barry Goldwater in 1964 and to Richard Nixon in 1968. And then in 1980, Ronald Reagan, who was a liberal who had turned conservative, became president and cemented the conservatism of the Republican Party. One of the results of the Reagan presidency was the ending of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, required radio and television to present issues fairly and not in a partisan manner. Well, quickly, Rush Limbaugh became the leading conservative in the nation. My mother loved Rush Limbaugh and swung much more conservative under his influence. My father also became more conservative over those years, which I realized when he characterized me as having become a radical. Well, I saw myself as a moderate Democrat. I interpret that as an example of the fact that as people move further left or right, they see the other side as being more extreme, often more extreme than it is. Right-wing Republicans are very likely to label Democrats as socialists or Marxists. And my cousin told me that she knew I was a socialist. and that's part of what is happening as we've had the partisan polarization. People move further themselves and they see the other side as having moved much further than it may have. Okay, now Jacques asked that I include the impact of polarization on two issues: immigration and climate change. I will take up immigration first. Immigration is a major problem for many developed countries. Regularly, we learn of boatloads of people coming from Africa or the Middle East into Europe. The Swedish government accepted numerous immigrants, but that resulted in the rapid growth of an anti-immigrant party in Sweden. And so now Sweden is clamping down on what they call irregular immigration. The United States receives more immigrants than any other country by a wide margin. For the last century or more, the United States has been the world's chosen destination for immigration. And regularly, the census has found that 13 or 14% of the people living in the United States have been immigrants. Today, the U.S. admits about 700,000 people annually, and formally. That's the formal admission. But people get here other ways also. Bright students from many foreign countries can get admission to universities, then some of them will figure out one way or another to stay. My family provided jobs, scholarships, or living accommodations for 4 foreign students who came to the United States to study for graduate degrees and have remained here. Now long enough that 3 of the 4 have already retired. The mother of one of these students later won the right to come to the United States by luck in a lottery that the United States conducted in her country to determine who would get to come to the United States. Much of American agriculture depends on migrant labor, as does a lot of construction. The House of Representatives passed a bill in 2021 to legalize the system of farm workers, but the bill died in the Senate. How does polarization affect immigration attitudes? The New York Times in May of this year said, quote, "Immigration has proved to be a potent political messaging tool, particularly for Republicans who have rallied voters behind campaigns to close the border with Mexico and denounce anything other than stringent security proposals as amnesty. And Democrats have long resisted border security initiatives without measures to grant legal status to millions of undocumented immigrants residing in the United States and to expand immigration in the future." So that's the New York Times interpretation of the impact of polarization on immigration. In the 21st century, there have been 5 notable attempts to pass immigration bills in the Congress, sometimes bipartisan bills, once a Republican bill, once a Democratic bill. Twice the Senate passed bills which failed in the House. Once the House passed an immigration bill which failed in the Senate, but not once in the last quarter century has Congress been able to agree on an immigration bill. Let me give you another example, the Dreamers. For nearly 2 decades, Democrats and Republicans in Congress have crafted versions of legislation that would offer immigrants who came here as children a path to U.S. citizenship. Presidents of both parties have expressed support. Many polls show the majority of Americans support it also. But that bipartisan enthusiasm has not materialized into law. Why not? PolitiFact said that neither party was willing to concede its priorities
Democrats generally favored a bill that addressed Dreamers, but they didn't want to give in to President Donald Trump's priorities on immigration. Republicans did not want to extend an Obama-era program which deferred deportation without achieving other goals such as a reduction in legal immigration or funding for a U.S.-Mexico border wall. Now we have a situation in which Texas and other Republican-led states are challenging the Obama-Dreamer authorization in court so that the Supreme Court may decide the issue. And the problem continues. About 100,000 undocumented immigrants graduate from high school each year. 1/4 of them are in California, 1/6 of them are in Texas, the rest are spread among numerous other states. In the Southwest, the U.S., the concern about immigration is tied very much, the level of concern about immigration is tied very much to the party of the governor. Texas has a Republican governor, and Texas is very concerned about immigration problems. California and New Mexico have Democratic governors, and they seem to have much less concern about the immigration problems. Arizona, the remaining Southwest state, was very concerned about immigration problems when it had Republican governors. Now it has a Democratic governor, and the concern seems to be much less. So much of it is very much a partisan issue, the immigration. Okay, now let me turn to climate change policy. Few countries are meeting our climate change needs. We have a serious situation, and most of us are offenders. But generally, more efforts to reduce and mitigate the effects of climate on Earth are being done by Democrats. President Barack Obama and Joe Biden have embraced many efforts. President Trump mostly fought them. I remember a Republican National Convention several years ago in which the delegates chanted, "Drill, baby, drill, drill, baby, drill, drill, baby, drill," over and over. In other words, those delegates wanted to increase the drilling for fossil fuels. On the other hand, California, a state run by Democrats, has led the way in insisting on fewer pollutants from automobiles. According to a Pew Research Center survey conducted in April 2021, majorities of Americans say that the federal government, businesses, and other actors are doing too little to reduce the effects of climate change, and majorities express support for a variety of approaches aimed at addressing the issues. But at the same time, the public has limited appetite for some of the more dramatic proposed changes to energy consumption, such as the phasing out of fossil fuels entirely or ending the production of gasoline-powered vehicles by 2035. Given this ambivalence of the public, we're not likely to see Congress taking a lead. If any action is taken, it will be by presidential directive by President Biden, and it will be challenged by Republican states' attorney generals, and it will be decided in the courts. Now we'll turn to my third major area, democracy. Does polarization endanger democracy? Yes, I think so, but I have a troubling conclusion. It is the Trump party that I think is endangering democracy, and particularly Donald Trump, who has convinced Republicans that he lost the last election because it was rigged. Thomas Friedman, three-time Pulitzer Prize winner and columnist for the New York Times, made the case explicitly a couple of years ago, saying, quote, "The big lie that the 2020 election must have been rigged because Trump lost is being embraced by a solid majority of elected Republicans and ordinary party members, local, state, and national." And Thomas Friedman went on, "Denying the legitimacy of our last election is becoming a prerequisite to be elected as a Republican. This is creating a filter that over time will block out anyone willing to tell the truth about the election." Thomas Friedman said, "This will leave us with a Republican Party where you cannot rise without declaring that the sun sets in the east. A Republican Party where being willing to help steal an election is literally a job requirement." Next door to us is Wyoming, where we saw the Trump effect clearly. The Wyoming Congresswoman, Liz Cheney, refused to toe Trump's line and participated in the investigation of what happened on January 6th. Quickly, she lost her position as the third-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. Later, she was censured by the Republican National Committee, and she lost re-election by a wide margin, getting only 29% of the vote in the primary election in Wyoming. That was a clear object lesson that the Republican Party had closed behind Donald Trump. Despite the evidence that millions of people saw on January 6th, despite the findings of the January 6th committee, despite 3 indictments, Donald Trump is far and away the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. In addition, he is tied with Joe Biden in recent polls. Why is Trump so popular? Trump supporters admire Trump's willingness to shake his fist at the establishment. They are pleased to be part of his in-group and to be opposed to the outsiders, that is, Democrats. A quick look at the 2020 election shows Trump's strengths at the election results. He won votes from 97% of the conservatives, 92% of the Republicans, 84% of the white evangelical Protestants, 65% of the vote from whites without a college degree, 65% from rural areas, and 58% of the elderly. The shift of whites without a college degree towards the Republican Party seems to have started during the Obama candidacy in 2008 and then moved further with each Trump candidacy. I think part of Trump's appeal is that he is authoritarian. The title of Trump's speech to the Republican National Convention accepting his nomination in 2016 was, "I alone can do it." I alone can do it. That's an authoritarian approach. That's a narcissistic approach. That's Donald Trump's approach. This authoritarian appeal has come to appeal to many conservatives. The Conservative Political Action Conference, one of the largest conservative groups in the United States, held their conference last year in Hungary because of their admiration for Hungarian President Viktor Orban and his success. Viktor Orban is a white ethno-nationalist authoritarian. He has restricted Muslim immigration and LGBTQ rights while building a close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Many American conservatives, however, see Orban's Hungary as an anti-woke paradise. Orban gained power by emphasizing cultural issues and then consolidated power by pushing for autocracy. Note that pattern. First cultural issues and then autocracy. Trump has raised a lot of money with each indictment, and his polling support seems to have been improving ever since the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago to retrieve secret government documents that Trump was hiding. One recent poll showed that 17% of the voters who prefer Trump over Biden think that Trump committed serious federal crimes. I find that astonishing and frightening that there are so many people who think that Trump has committed serious federal crimes but still want him to be president. I think the willingness of Republican voters to excuse Trump's crimes against the law and the Constitution and to manipulate election procedures in order to reduce the number of Democratic voters indicates a major problem for democracy. I think the January 6th riot was a significant danger for democracy, orchestrated by Donald Trump. I think the crowd would have hanged Vice President Mike Pence and Speaker Nancy Pelosi if they had found them. Remember, the group brought a gallows with them to the riot. I'm disturbed by my conclusions that Donald Trump will receive the Republican nomination for president, that he has a good chance of winning the presidency, that the Republican Party may win control of Congress, and that they will follow Trump's lead. And in Trump's words, quote, "We will liberate America from these villains once and for all." End quote. That's the recipe for dictatorship. Who are the villains? Particularly government employees and Democrats. And so that's the way that Trump is referring to government employees, the deep state. He's going to get rid of the deep state. I'm concerned that this may not end well. What a disturbing conclusion. Thank you.
No.
Yeah, I did, someone asked if you would take a few questions.
Sure.
So,
John.
Given that wokeism seems to be a big part of the issue right now, are you thinking that the United States as a democracy is ungovernable?
It's governable at present. It's more difficult than because of the polarization, because we can't get bipartisanship. And it extends, we see that in Congress, but it extends to the general population. I'm part of a group in Missouri which has been trying to bring Democrats and Republicans together. We mostly failed. We did manage at one program to get a Republican senator, a former Republican senator and former Democratic senator to come together to talk about the issue. They came in part because they wanted to talk to each other or hear each other's views. But we didn't attract a very good crowd. It was a small crowd, and we never got anywhere. There's not much appetite for bipartisanship, for seeing the other side. America ungovernable? Well, no, we're governing now, and we're moving ahead some, but I'm concerned about the future.
Stop saying that.
Donna?
I decided to not have Trump alienate me against some family members and some dear friends. I didn't give him that power. And those same people, like this past month when I met with them, said they're not voting for Trump. But there's no one else for them to vote for, and they've been brainwashed that Biden is just as bad as Trump. So I think it's they're saying they don't back Trump, but in reality, unless there's another candidate that will rise above Trump, I think Trump will get the vote because they're still Republicans.
Yes, there's a lot of support for Trump. There is opposition, certainly, in the Republican Party, and there has been opposition all along. Some of you may remember Bob Brown, who was the Republican candidate for governor in 2000, I think it was. Bob Brown, very active Republican in the state, and he was overwhelmingly anti-Trump. And I got to interview him in the late teens, and he was very much anti-Trump. So there are distinct anti-Trump Republicans, but for the most part, Trump has captured the Republican Party. And we see that right now. Chris Christie is one candidate. Well, there are two candidates who are running for president who are not tiptoeing around Trump, and that's Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, and Will Hurd, a former congressman. Chris Christie is getting about 3% in the polls, and Will Hurd is not getting enough that it's been measured so far.
But there's also Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas. Asa Hutchinson is also working against Trump.
Oh yeah, there's a number of others who are running against Trump, but most of them are tiptoeing around Trump and hoping that somebody else will take Trump out, and that they will then get the support of the Trump voters. My concern is that that's not going to work. That they will need to confront Trump straight on. But they also see what's happened to Chris Christie. He's confronting Trump straight on, and he's getting about 3% of the vote. There's not much support there for him, and we'll see how it will work. Yeah.
Now, I'm just curious on whether there is a country, a democratic country that is working, that we could emulate.
How about Canada?
Yeah, that would be an immediate suggestion of Canada.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, Finland and, Iceland. The more socialist-oriented countries seem to be working okay. Would that be correct?
I don't know necessarily about them. England went through a period after World War II in which Churchill had been the prime minister during the war and been the leader. And after the war, the country turned and said, let's give Labour a chance. Labour came in and they set up their socialized medicine system. And they socialized a number of industries. Well, when the Conservatives got back in, they unsocialized a number of those industries, but not a medical care system. And so Britain continues to have an extensive, really good health system. So this was this period in which there was intense differences between the parties, and as it turned out that the medical system continues to be a pretty good socialized medicine system, but some of the other industries that the Labour Party has socialized have now gone back to private control. So this is an example of what things could happen, and we could become less polarized. That we're going the wrong direction right now.
So it was interesting listening to you speak, thank you, because every time you would say something and I would think of the next fact, and you would state the next fact, so it was really good to hear your talk. I think it is income inequality that causes polarization. And I think it started with Reagan, and it's been step by step by step by step with citizens, but not with, what's the, equal time, when we lost equal time. And then we got Citizens United, so we had, capitalists letting it. But I think, it seems to me one thing we might be able to have in common to minimize that polarization is income inequality. And I'm a member of the Yellowstone County Democrats, and we talk about that. I wonder what you thought of that.
Okay, yes, it's a very good point. We had a much less income inequality. Well, it came during World War II. We had the problem that people were making good money, but we had the risk of inflation. Well, so the government did a couple of things. One, they set up high levels of taxation. So at the very top levels of something like 90% tax that got people who were very wealthy. And we encouraged people to buy war bonds. And that soaked up a lot of, between the two of them, it soaked up a lot of money. Well, the taxation continued, and I remember people in the 60s that I was talking to, and they were saying, well, why should I earn any more money? I just lose it in taxes. And that's what they claimed, but they never stopped working and earning money. But people did note that the more income you had, the more you would have. Well, then with Reagan came, one of the things that Reagan did was to cut the taxes for high income. And the pattern of the Republican Party has been very consistently since then to lower the taxes on corporations and lower the taxes on high income people. And so that has led, I think, to income inequality and a problem. Remember that we did have 4 years of balanced budgets. The last 4 years of Clinton's term.
Right.
And when I made that point to my class, immediately I have a Republican who stands up and says, of course there was a Republican Congress at that time too. And he's quite right. There was a Republican Congress and a Democratic president, but we had a balanced budget for 4 years. In 2000, George Bush got elected, and immediately George Bush said, we need a tax cut. And immediately the budget went out of balance, and it has not been balanced since. So we're in a situation in which nobody likes to raise taxes, and so the Democrats aren't very good at raising taxes. And if voters get a chance to vote on it, they're not very good at voting taxes in. But the Republicans clearly, and still their viewpoint, that we have to cut the taxes. Well, cutting the taxes leads to the deficit, and it leads to greater deficits, and we have very large deficits right now, and a large national debt.
Thank you so much. When I said he would be provocative in thinking, I didn't say he would make you feel good.